Britain, for the first time, now has under 100,000 pubs for the first time in ages.
It is, unfortunately. I think there's probably around 40,000 now.
Wow.
I don't like to see pubs close. However, this makes me a bit unpopular when I say this. We had so many pubs because most pubs that we have now evolved in or were established in the 19th century. And in the 1830s, there was a law which was to try and stop people drinking so much gin, by the way. And so the government had this law called the Beer House Act, where any ratepayer could buy a license and open a pub. That's all you needed to do. And the license was really inexpensive. You open your pub, but you had to be selling beer. So this was a way of the more benign drink, people to drink it. And so that's why we have so many 19th century pubs. They date from this period. So anybody could open a pub as long as you were a ratepayer. We lived in an industrial country. We had lots and lots of heavy industry. There was mining. There was all sorts of jobs that needed, you worked in a foundry or a forge or something that was hot and bothered, and you're like, oh my goodness, after work you need to go and drink some beer to cool you down. Nowadays, we don't have that heavy industry, and people don't go down the mines as much as they used to. More people work in offices or in less manual labour now. And so the need for beer has gone as much as it was in the 19th century. Plus, we have more options for refreshment, tea, carbonated water. You don't have to be drinking beer to cool yourself down anymore. Also, nutrition's much better. So you eat food's less expensive. So you eat food rather than just drink. Men nowadays, probably in the last 30 or 40 years, it's more likely that men will go home after work and read the children a bedtime story, or they might give them a bath, or they want to be there for when the children are going to bed. They want to have dinner, supper with the family. They don't want to spend all night at the pub, but that's what men used to do. So the pub was the centre of everything. Now men and women, they've got more options of entertainment. They can go to the theatre, the cinema, they go for a run after work. They can go for dinner. They can do all sorts of things. There isn't just the pub. So the pubs that we have now, our lives have changed. Demographics have changed. Also, the ownership of pubs is very complicated in Britain. And some of the ownership models don't reward the leaseholders for doing really well and making profit, because what the owner of the lease will then do, or the owner of the property, they'll increase the rent, or they'll make it really difficult for those leaseholders to run pubs. So a lot of pubs have gone out of business for several reasons. The pandemic had a big impact. Yeah. Tax on beer is really high. Tax on everything actually in pubs is really high. So that prevents people from going as regularly to the pub because they can't afford it anymore. Cost of living, all sorts of things, reasons not to go to the pub. And that's one of the reasons why more pubs are closing. Plus, in urban centres, I live in Brighton, there are loads and loads of pubs. But you can see where the pubs have closed because they're now either convenience stores. This is everywhere, not just Brighton, by the way. Any urban area, you'll see where the pubs used to be. And the flats, or they're convenience stores, or they've got another purpose because they're on corners, they're in high footfall areas. We have had too many pubs in this country for the market to support them all. And so really pubs are closing for several reasons. It's really sad though, I think, when you see a pub closed.
Yeah.
However, in some parts of the country, mostly urban, if somebody is running an independent pub and they've got an amazing beer selection, independent beers, independent ciders and gin and wine, they will get people coming and supporting them. So it depends who is running the pub, what the business model is, what the offering is, and where you are.
So the pubs that tend to be more like traditional, are they the ones that are closing down and the ones that are able to adapt to new trends and demands for different things, like you said about like a different variety of drinks and stuff? Will they probably be able to survive?
the ones that tend to close are owned by big corporations who have very strict rules and regulations on what the publican, the license holder or the leaseholder, what they can sell, where they can buy it from. And if that pub owner, big corporations, sometimes they're breweries, sometimes they're pub companies, if there are lots of the pubs owned by the same corporation, then what you're going to get to drink is the same in every single pub. So if you're in a big urban area and there's loads of pubs owned by that company, you're just going to get the same offering. So why would you go to that pub or that one? There's no choice. So the independents, if there is an affluent customer base who can afford to go to pubs and want that type of offering, they're the ones who will manage to survive.
Is there?
I love
But
that.
yeah, no, I love them as well. They're amazing. That brings me to the next question, which is what are the potential cultural impacts on this decline? What do we lose if the pubs continue to keep declining at the rate they are?
People who live in smaller urban areas and villages will lose more than the people in bigger cities, because there will still be pubs in cities. What we lose, particularly in small urban areas or villages, is a centre, a heart of the village. I'm from North Yorkshire originally, and I'm really fortunate in that the village where my family are, there are two pubs that are viable and that are really well supported. It's a really small village, by the way, so it's unusual that a small village could support two pubs. I mean, there are a lot of tourists. It's the Yorkshire Dales, and so you do get tourists who support the pubs as well as the locals. But they are the heart of the community. That's where the community, the residents, go to socialise and to find out the news and to have a good time and meet the friends. So that's what we lose. Also, socialising is really important for mental health. And so people who lose their pubs then don't have anywhere to socialise. And so the mental health might suffer. They become lonely or they miss out on that sort of really great vibe that you get when you're socialising, which is so good for your mental health. Mental health has an impact on physical health as well. You know, Oxford University did a study a few years ago, and they discovered that going to the pub and having a drink, and it doesn't have to be alcoholic, by the way, but just going there and being with people and socialising was good for the mental health, and therefore it's good for physical health. And that's Oxford University. And, you know, they're not just like saying it, there's proof. So they've really researched it. So that's what we lose. We lose our heritage as well. You know, Britain is a nation of pubs. It's where we used to socialise all the time because they're communal spaces. There was a writer he was a French writer, but he lived in Britain. He was called Hilaire Belloc, and he wrote stories in the 1920s. And he has a really well-known quotation, which is something along the lines of, when you've lost your pubs, he's talking about England or Britain. In Britain, when you've lost your pubs, you've lost the sense of yourself. I'm paraphrasing it. But basically he was saying that British people, we identify as pub goers. And when we lose them, who are we? That's what he was basically saying.
Well, just think about the amount of people that go out on Friday and Saturdays, and where do they go? They go to a pub. When I go on dog walks with my family, where do we go afterwards? It's to a pub. You know, it's just a thing to do afterwards. I feel like if we didn't have that, we would definitely lose a lot of our cultural heritage, like you said. Do you think that the increase in digital technology and social media has affected the pub's kind of livelihoods? Because like, if this was 20 years ago, 30 years ago, we'd be speaking probably together in a pub, well, having this conversation. But because of the digital era, we're able to do it remotely. Do you think that's had an effect as well?
I think it has, particularly in a generation of your age generation, Jacob, in that you are digital natives and a lot of socialising for your generation happens online. Also, there are fewer people drinking alcohol. What are you? Are you Gen Z?
I searched it last week and I can't remember it.
Yeah, I don't know if it's Gen X. I think that may be a bit older. Anywho, so your generation is drinking less alcohol. So therefore, they're not going to the pub as much. They might go to a coffee shop, or they might just hang out
Mm.
in I don't know, a gaming parlor or something like that. So not going to the pub is a big issue. And drinking alcohol is a big issue as well, which is why so many brands are now bringing out non-alcoholic versions of their alcoholic drinks, by the way, just to try and get people still buying their brands. Yeah, I mean, socializing online and not naturally just going to the pub. In future, we need to bring people back to the pub. I mean, you say that people still go to the pub at the weekend, and I'm in a city where there are loads of students, and students do go to pubs, actually. You still see a lot of students going into pubs, but it's whether the younger, the Gen Zs and the younger ones will think, oh, I'd like to go to the pub. I think the pubs will probably have to make some alterations to adapt to those
Yeah.
demands from that generation and that market. As long as it's always social life that's at the heart of it, and it always will be in pubs, but that must be absolutely stressed by publicans. So they might need to have games that those younger people want, or things to bring them in that aren't necessarily just about standing there with a glass in your hand, doing other things as well as drinking.
I think a reason why I go to the pub sometimes is to watch something like a football match. I feel like that will still have quite a big pull on the younger generations, especially in Britain. So I think that's kind of a beacon of hope for pubs. A lot of pubs where I'm currently living in Falmouth, they've adapted quite well in terms of like doing things to entice young people. So there's somewhere called Games Room, which is kind of a pub, but it also has loads of pool tables and dartboards and stuff. I feel like if pubs do that, instead of just sticking to their roots and trying to stay traditional, especially in urban places with a lot of young people, that will definitely keep them going.